Hey, do you remember this little guy? His name is Greg Bovino. He led Donald Trump's chaotic, violent, inept paramilitary invasions of multiple U.S. cities until he was fired a couple of months ago. Mr. Bovino has been spending his retirement lamenting that he was not able to achieve his personal dream of deporting nearly a third of the U.S. population. He's also posted photos like this one on social media. He posted that on social media. He posted that photo just before jetting off to a white supremacist conference in Portugal this weekend. He was the special guest at a gathering of European far right politicians and activists who advocate for making Europe more white. Bovino appeared before a giant photo of himself in the 1930s German-style greatcoat he apparently made for himself to wear on the job. He told the assembled fascists in Portugal that the United States and Europe have, quote, the same problems and the same solutions. Last fall, when that tiny terror was leading the Trump administration's attack on Chicago, Trump's federal prosecutors, you might remember, they charged a local Chicago man, a Chicago carpenter, with plotting to kill Greg Bovino. Trump's DOJ said that this man had put out a hit on Greg Bovino, had offered cash to anybody who would kill him. Bovino said it was just more evidence of how terrible things are in terrible Chicago. He called the city a war zone. But, you know, interestingly enough, that case immediately fell completely apart after multiple court rulings that prosecutors were trying to say stuff in court about the defendant that they had no evidence to back up. The jury in the case proceeded to acquit the defendant in less than 3 hours. That pitiful, failed case was run out of the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Northern District of Illinois in Chicago. The case just fell apart completely, which is important to know because everything is falling apart in that particular U.S. Attorney's Office right now. At the center of the collapse is the office's case against the so-called Broadview Six. Federal prosecutors initially indicted 6 people for protesting outside the ICE facility in Broadview, Illinois. They charged them with felony conspiracy. But then things started going wrong quickly. They dropped the charges quickly against 2 of the defendants. Then they pared back some of the charges against the remaining 4. That made defense attorneys start to wonder what was going on. Defense attorneys demanded to see the grand jury transcripts, which would show how prosecutors got a grand jury to indict these defendants in the first place. Rather than turn over those transcripts, the U.S. Attorney's Office instead just dropped the remaining felony charge altogether, saying, okay, now you don't need to see the grand jury stuff, right? The defense attorneys at that point could have just celebrated having all the charges dropped, but they decided they really wanted to get to the bottom of what was going on. The judge eventually agreed with the defense attorney's requests, and she ordered prosecutors to hand over the grand jury transcripts. It was quickly clear why they'd been trying to keep them hidden. Upon reviewing those transcripts, the judge said, quote, I have read hundreds, if not thousands, of grand jury transcripts. I have never seen the types of prosecutorial behavior before a grand jury that I saw in those transcripts. She accused the U.S. Attorney's Office not just of all that misbehavior, but of trying to hide that misbehavior from her by initially giving her a redacted version of the transcripts that hid the worst stuff that they had done. Well, upon getting dressed down by the judge that way, the U.S. Attorney's Office then dropped all the charges, all the felonies, all the misdemeanors. And the Trump-appointed U.S. attorney in that city has been flailing ever since, saying he wasn't personally aware of any of the misconduct, saying he took action as soon as he heard about it. He's announcing sweeping new reforms to his office. But against his denials, one of the Broadview Six defense attorneys, a man named Chris Parenti, says the U.S. attorney himself is a big part of the problem here. Parenti accuses the U.S. attorney of having had contact with the grand jurors himself. If true, that's basically a catastrophe for that federal prosecutor's office. The U.S. Justice Department under Donald Trump has cratered. It's basically gone. But in Chicago specifically, what's going on there right now could result in potentially one of the biggest federal prosecution scandals ever in the history of this country. And that's saying something for Chicago specifically, let alone for the country, but I mean it, for the whole country. Joining us now is Chris Parenti, attorney for one of the Broadview Six, former federal prosecutor himself. Mr. Parenti, I really appreciate you making time to be here. Thank you.
Thanks for having me on, Rachel.
So this case is not over, despite the fact that all the charges against your client and all his co-defendants have been dismissed. You're continuing to push on this issue of alleged misconduct by the federal prosecutors here. The judge says she's going to entertain briefings on whether this was a vindictive prosecution. What should we expect to keep happening here, and why are you still pushing?
We're still pushing, Rachel, because, again, the government picked the wrong 6 people here to go after, right? These are 6 people who were out there at that Broadview facility protesting for the rights of the undocumented that were being abused by our government. So they were willing to risk their own finances, their own freedom to fight for those people. And they are willing to see this through into the end because they realize how important this case is, right? What this case has done is it allowed us to see what goes on in secret inside these grand jury rooms. Over the past week or two, I heard Acting Attorney General Todd Blanche on these news shows telling people, hey, it might look like DOJ's, returning political indictments against Mr. Comey and Don Lemon and the Southern Poverty Law Center. But don't worry, it's not us. It's the grand jury, right? That's the official word here. But if his prosecutors are corrupting that grand jury process, and I can assure you they are because we've seen these transcripts, then all of that falls away, right? Because then you can't, the grand jury is just being bulldozed by federal prosecutors who are acting in an unethical way. And the behavior that we saw in our grand jury is, it's appalling. As a former federal prosecutor, I've never seen anything like this. The federal prosecutor went in there and personally vouched for the indictment. She threw out grand jurers who voiced dissent, right? That's one way to get an indictment. Oh, no, you don't like it? Then get out of the room. And she had contact with the grand jury outside of the grand jury room, which you can't do. So if that's what they're doing to get these cases, these political cases, and the Broadview 6 case was a political case, and we're convinced it was directed from the White House or the Trump administration, if they're willing to have prosecutors act in such an unethical way in a room where there is nobody, there's no judge, there's no defense attorney, it is built on trust that the Department of Justice will have its prosecutors do the right thing. If that trust erodes, then the whole system collapses. And that's why all 6 defendants in the Broadview 6 case are willing to continue to push this fight forward because they want the sunlight to expose what this Department of Justice is having their prosecutors do behind closed doors.
I'm really glad that you explained it that way. I feel like it's part of the reason that I've been so interested in this case and in the other cases where misconduct before the grand jury is has been alleged. I mean, again, I'm not a lawyer, but it seems to me like us non-lawyers in the country really need to get our heads around this particular problem, because if they are lying to the grand jury, if they are engaging in misconduct before the grand jury, what that means in non-legalese is that they can bring criminal cases, they can bring charges, they can potentially arrest and jail people on the basis of nothing. And they can do it to all of their political opponents, to whole classes of people. If the grand jury system falls apart because they are abusing it, because they are behaving behind closed doors in ways that aren't what they're supposed to be doing under the judicial system, it really kicks the door wide open to mass arrests of their political opponents. Now, the judge acceding to your request to look at these grand jury transcripts, recognizing and being so stern with the U.S. Attorney's Office here after what they did, what kind of penalties are possible here? What kind of punishment is possible here? How can this U.S. Attorney's Office, how can any of these prosecutors' offices be sort of brought back under the right side of the law if judges decide to do that?
Yeah, we are hopeful. I mean, this judge was deceived by the U.S. Attorney's Office for 7 months. My view of this is she is angry, right? For 7 months. And keep in mind, she came out of that office as I did, right? And I think she didn't see it because you don't want to see it. You want to believe that U.S. Attorney's Office, the Chicago U.S. Attorney's Office, which is known around the country as being one of the preeminent offices in this country, you don't want to see that they're doing things the wrong way, or they're putting, not just their finger on their scale, but their entire body on the scale for this one, right? And you don't want to see that. And now that at the end of this, right, she saw it, right? And the government tried to hide it. They were ordered to turn over transcripts, and what they did is they redacted certain parts and they removed pages, right? You would never do that with something that's only going to the court, right? You redact things that'll be on a public docket, social security numbers, birth dates, names. Things that are just going to a judge in her chambers, you wouldn't redact anything. But someone in that office, and maybe more than one person, sat down and literally crossed out all of this misbehavior that I just described for you that occurred there and took out pages and didn't tell the court. So you know, everyone is thinking that the office is acting with that presumption of regularity that the department is usually entitled to. But as we tried to argue to the court, Judge, that's gone. And it's not just for what's happened in Chicago. You see it across the country. This Department of Justice has mailed it in on doing things the right way. And now it's time for judges like her and judges across the country to say, I'm not going to allow this. We have now seen what you're doing behind closed doors, and the American people need to see it. Because if you're doing it here in Chicago, I guarantee you they're doing it in every other office because they're getting pressured to put through these indictments that no grand jury, if you didn't put your finger on the scale, would indict. And keep in mind, in our case, the grand jury voted no. And it shows how relentless this department is. Even when the grand jury, who almost never says no, voted no against this indictment, they went back the next week and engaged in more misconduct to get this across the finish line. That's the scary part.
Yeah. And judges around the country, in Chicago and around the country, sort of getting up on their hind legs and saying no to this, exposing it, acknowledging that it's happening and saying we're going to put a stop to it, could be, I think, a whole new phase in Trumpism and in what this administration is doing and even tries to do. Chris Parenti, former federal prosecutor, attorney for one of the Broadview Six. Mr. Parenti, thank you so much for your time. Please keep us apprised. I'd love to have you back.
Will do. Thank you, Rachel.